Another day, another woman battling seasonal depression. I really wanted to film today because I know that even if I don't feel it, I enjoy doing this. I also want to challenge myself that me wanting to create doesn't mean I have to perform. Um, and so, I'm sitting on a furry, dirty couch. I have so many dishes in the sink. I'm officially burnt out socially, but having the social obligations have been the only way that I'm doing anything, frankly, because as soon as I'm alone, I don't have the energy for anything. What's interesting is this idea that I have to feel ashamed or guilty for wanting to show up less than happy, but still wanting to show up. And I think in a way, social anxiety can kind of compound the depression, because even talking about it, I feel the pressure to be presentable, to make it digestible, because otherwise people jump to problem solving, and that makes me even more uncomfortable, honestly. I think people who struggle with any kind of depression understand this exhaustion of I don't want to be fixed, because I don't think it's inherently a problem. I think people are just uncomfortable. I feel like in a way depression is like a shortcut to understanding how uncomfortable other people are with negative emotions. Thankfully, the sun's out right now, which is always nice. And I'm trying to pay attention to what Nugget does, because I think our pets show us what we're supposed to be doing when the sun is out. We're supposed to be basking in it, and taking in as much as we can. And I really like how animals show the instinct of needing to care for yourself when you are in any kind of deprivation. Um, yeah, because they're not consumed by hustle culture or performance, or anything like that. I'm losing my energy already. I mean, I didn't really have it to begin with, but I knew that I wanted to do something I find fun, even when I don't feel it, which is why I turned the camera on and got the gumption to bring my tripod over and corral a list of books. Um, I really want to disassociate and stop, but I would like to keep going. And even if I don't feel it right now, I know that this is something that makes life more bearable. So I hope you don't mind that I'm low energy, because that's part of who I am. And it's not just part of who I am when I'm depressed, but it is also just part of who I am. I can be low energy, and I don't show that to even my loved ones very often, because I take a lot of pride in being funny, and I take a lot of pride in making people smile and laugh. And I think I put too much of my identity there sometimes. I feel like it's almost a youngest sibling stereotype, because it's like, well, if I can't be the oldest, if I can't be the most blank, I can at least be the most funny. Moments like this, culturally and around the world and spiritually, also exhaust me, on top of the weather and just seasonal depression. Not because I don't like looking at what's going on in the world. there can be some truth in the presence of darkness that an absence of darkness can't shed onto truth, if that makes sense. And I would call it a high tolerance for darkness. I think a lot of people have a low tolerance for darkness, but I find myself, the older I get, having a high tolerance for it. I don't know, I think the more bad I have been through personally, it's enhanced my empathy every single time. Because I think there's a lot of privilege in not understanding a lot of bad things. And I think talking about books and engaging with entertainment, books especially, I find it so strange sometimes when I consider that generally reading and shows, movies, etc., are all considered entertainment. But by implication, that means a lot of times people's negative life experiences are being consumed by others as entertainment. And I think I'm just contemplating, and this is hitting me extra because I'm reading The Blue Castle right now by L.M. Montgomery, and I'm sure it's overall a good book, but it's starting off in an all too relatable, depressing place with being in your late 20s and single and facing the sociological prejudices of being single. And, it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, I'm very used to this at this point. It's funny because it's so true. And it's just one of many ways of living in the world that you just have to continually roll with the punches of people not choosing to try to empathize with you, if that makes sense. I'm sure this is also partially my depression talking, but I'm like, I find value in sad or dark stories sometimes, but currently I feel a little bitter about the fact that some people can absorb dark stories that are lived people's experiences and consider it entertainment because they have the privilege of not having lived that experience, if that makes sense. And obviously my example is just one example. There's a billion other ways you could view that, which is why when I feel like trauma is being exploited by an author, it really makes me mad. Let's get into the actual video. So today we are talking about book recommendations 300 to 400 pages. This is part of my continued book length recommendation series. And so I would say this is the average size of books generally. Most books tend to be, I would say, between, probably nowadays with shorter attention spans, it's probably more like 200 to 400. But I feel like pre the past 5 to 10 years, I would say average books are probably anywhere from 300 to 500 pages. Nugget would like the heated blanket. So 300 to 400 pages, I would say, is like prime average book length for most of the things that I read anyway. I would say anything under 300 pages is generally small with an O, and anything over 500 is a chonker. Those are my preferred terms. If you are now getting into reading more, I would say you're probably going to come across these lengths of books the most. So welcome to the 300 to 400 page length. I have 15 books today that I wanted to talk about. Clearly, I own more small books than average books because I only have 4 of the 15 on me. The first book, I think this will round out me talking about all of J.D. Salinger's books in these recommendation videos because I love J.D. Salinger. He is one of my favorite authors of all time. Probably my second favorite author of all time. Very, very close second. Apparently, then, this is his longest work. And that is 9 stories. This is his short story collection, which now that I've read all of his work, I would love to reread because I don't know if it's every single story, but at least a few of these stories are related to some of the siblings in the Glass family that we see throughout all of his works. The Catcher in the Rye being the exception, where there's an implication that one of the siblings wrote the book, but none of them are actually in the story itself. And so 9 stories I know definitely involves Seymour Glass in one of the stories, and I can't remember who else because again, I think some of the stories the characters were through implication. Some of them might have been by name. It's been a few years since I read this, but I would love to reread these because I read this before I'd read all of his other main novellas. And so now I know way more about the siblings, and I think I could more easily deduce who these stories are about, but also just find more value to glean from the stories because I'm much more familiar with and comfortable with the Glass family. So I can't tell you too much about the short stories themselves, but I think now that I've read them all, I would suggest reading this last after all of the other books. I would suggest that you read the novellas first. So either Franny and Zooey or Raise High the Roof Being Carpenters and Seymour. Whichever order, read those 2 collections first, and then read The Catcher in the Rye, and then read 9 stories. Because there's a lot more layers that you can get out of The Catcher in the Rye and 9 stories if you read all of the novellas first, because they're all very character oriented, and that's why I really love them. J.D. Salinger, what a man. He will always make you laugh. There are stories in this collection that will make you laugh. That is what I love about him. The second book, very popular. I only read it for the first time in 2024 and only saw the movie for the first time in 2024, which is shocking because this is so beloved by so many people. And that is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This is a Studio Ghibli movie. I'm assuming most people have seen the movie, not necessarily read the book. The book and the movie are fairly different, but they're also both lovely and enjoyable and cozy in their own ways. The heart of the story is the same. Sorry if I that just reminded me of when Cole Sprouse goes, she's hot. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on the character names, but this follows a young woman who decides that she wants to try to learn magic. So she tracks down this wizard who lives in this moving castle that travels around the town, and she sneaks onto his castle. And that's like the premise, basically. It's really fun. It's like fantasy tropes in the most cozy, fun way, where you have like a goofy sidekick and a disgruntled wizard and a super curious and eager apprentice. So she ends up getting to be the apprentice. And yeah, there's a lot of twists and turns and extra layers that I won't get into, but it's just super fun. And it had been a while since I read something that felt a little more whimsical fantasy. It wasn't just using fantasy as a tool to explain something in the real world. It was just whimsical for the sake of whimsical. So I would highly recommend. I will say I ended up enjoying the movie more, and I think in general the movie is more beloved, but they're super different artistic perspectives and takes, because Studio Ghibli is very different from Diana Wynne Jones, is a British writer. So just culturally, they're very different angles that are super fun, and the movie especially is so colorful and sparkly, as all Studio Ghibli movies are, as I've gotten into them and come to love them like so many others did growing up. And they're always just perfect sparkly fun for the winter time, because they just like leak the sparkle of summer even in the depths of winter. And I feel like you can even tell because I've like perked up so much just talking about this book slash movie. The next book is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I had not planned to read this until my sister said I would probably love it based on some other quirky stories and characters that I love. Harold and Maude being the first to come to mind. And she was correct. This is about Eleanor. She is, I believe, 30. And she's super socially awkward. And so she's learning how to forge genuine connections after being a super huge homebody and a bit of a hermit for an extended period of time. And there's also the theme of therapy and self-improvement, as well as just the joys of watching someone improve and in a lot of different ways and find confidence in themselves. It's so wholesome. It's a little bit heartbreaking, but it's mostly just the joy of what hopefully we all do throughout our lives as we continue to improve ourselves and turn our lives more into what we hoped for it to be. And really pushing past the cynicism of adulthood that a lot of people can carry the weight of. This book was so helpful in just bringing refreshment to adulthood, and I think everyone could use a story like Eleanor's. So I think you should pick it up. The next one, this one is probably the most subjective, so not everyone will be into this, but if you love learning about music and just art, Billie Eilish's book, Billie Eilish, who knew, was a joy. And you're probably thinking, how is that a book that is a photo collection? And you would be correct. But also, it's kind of a book reading experience because if you pick up the audiobook, that is basically like their commentary as you look through the photo book. So it's her and her parents talking through the collection as you look through it. And again, I love like multimedia experiences. So this is like a reading experience. What I love about it is that it shows that not only is she a musician who loves creating music, but she's an artist who enjoys art. And even just the idea of not just wanting something to be a book, but wanting it to be a collection of photographs that are very artistic photographs in and of themselves. So there's just so many layers to enjoying the art in this collection. You're enjoying the photos, you're enjoying the composition of the photos themselves, how they were framed, how they were put together, how they were directed. And then the stories behind the photos themselves, whether it's outfits that she wore, fashion, whether it's events that she went to, whether it was performances that she did. It's truly just like for people who love art and enjoying art just for the sake of art being so creative and so cool. And Billy's another musician rather, that I love so much because you can tell that she genuinely just loves art. It's not inherently just the art that she makes, but she's so intentional about every single piece of art that is released about her, whether it's a photograph, a social media post, a performance, a speech. Every single thing is intentional because she likes to think about what goes into art. And I just think that's so cool as an artist myself. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience to meditate on the joy of art and creativity. The most recent book I read in this page range that I enjoyed was at the end of 2025, and that was Romanov by Nadine Brandis. This is officially the first new book I've talked about that I've read since I talked about books in December. This was cool. It kind of delivered exactly what I was hoping for. It was a historical fantasy retelling of Anastasia and the Romanov family. And so the first half of the book was pretty historical heavy on events that she did write about in the little author's note at the end, that she pulled from all the sources that she read about the family and the characters. And then the second half was more so where the fantasy exploded, and she explored a lot more of the the creative side of, should these characters have been put in particular situations, what would they have then done? And so I really liked that she blended retelling some history with creativity, because I feel like that's the point of a retelling. You're not supposed to just rehash what you think happened, but you're supposed to put a creative spin on it. And I think the way that she incorporated the fantasy was a really cool spin on not just wanting to learn and dig into the details of real people who existed, but wanting to really try to inhabit them and empathize, and what do you think they would do if they were in this situation that they've never been in before, right? And that is just so much of what writing is embodying people that you're not and trying to understand them. And that's why, if you're a writer, I feel like understanding acting or trying out acting is really important. Can you really be an entirely different person from yourself? It's a really good exercise to try out and to dabble in. And so I think that particular genre was a really cool example of seeing an author try to dabble in role playing. And I think she did it really well. It was young adult, so it was, easy breezy. At times, you had to suspend your disbelief if you're, a bit older than a young adult reading it, or a teen. But what I really liked is I thought it targeted the target audience really well, in that it dealt with important themes of communication and forgiveness, these types of things that teenagers are still learning to do. And I thought it walked you through the hardship of pain in interpersonal relationships really well, and then obviously more systemic pain of how do you navigate um, things that are bigger than you and that are on a large scale, and how do you live in a world that is not always fair. So it posed a lot of good moral dilemmas and questions to really invite your teenagers into, and I think it held that audience's hand really well, while also challenging them to consider what they would do in these situations and how they would respond, which I think is a good goal to have with a young adult audience. The next book is another more summary, bright one, The Mostly True Story of Tanner and Louise by Colleen Oakley. This book I read, it had been on my list for a while, but I read it with a book club, which was super fun to discuss. And Tanner is a younger woman who meets Louise, or she gets asked to take care of Louise, maybe. It's been a little bit, but they forge an unexpected friendship, even though it's a bit rocky at first. And so it's kind of, the trope of like grumpy sunshine, but it's not romance, it's just platonic. And they end up going on an unexpected mission and journey, and there's so many layers. There's so much heart in all of the characters in this story, and it's so easy to root for them and enjoy your time with them, and it makes the book go by really fast. The main reason I added it to my list is it felt like similar to Harold and Maude character vibes, and it kind of was, but it wasn't. And I really liked what it did. I feel like this is the type of contemporary I would be happy to read more of. It's both average daily life stuff, but it's also being placed in unexpected situations at the same time, and putting very ordinary characters into unexpected situations. And I really like those stories where it blends ordinariness with the curiosity of strange situations. I think it just handled it in a delightful way. Okay, the next two books are by brothers, the Green brothers that most everyone knows. So my personal favorite is actually Hank Green's duology. And the first book is an absolutely remarkable thing. This duology was ahead of its time with VR and yeah, especially in book two, that like really impressed itself upon me. I would be actually super curious already in the past, like what, 6 years to reread this now and see, remind myself of more of the details of how it aged, because it's wild, because it felt still a bit far-fetched yet technologically when I read it at the time, but now it just feels like he told the future kind of, which is wild. The first book, it has a lot to do with virality and how things going viral was like really ramping up around 2019, 2020. And so basically, our protagonist, whose name evades me also, um, she runs into this statue in the city she's living in that like just appeared overnight, and she's like, what the heck? And then she goes online, and it turns out the same statue appeared in every city in the world at the same time, like overnight, and no one knows where they came from. And it has a lot to do with the concept of things going viral, the concept of people suddenly being famous overnight. And I love a good theme on fame, which actually will come up again with another book on this list. But analyzing like how people hit a threshold where they're suddenly considered famous or a celebrity. And this first book especially dealt a lot with that and was just sociologically fascinating to me. But it also deals with sci-fi. And that's about all I'm really going to say out of not wanting to spoil anything. But it was, again, like another entertaining sociological study to me. So I really enjoyed it. And then John Green, my favorite book by John Green is Looking for Alaska, which is also in this page range. This I read after I watched the show in 2021. I had a really rough year, and then I was just so engrossed with the show. It was like the highlight or the entertainment highlight of the year. I hadn't experienced much joy in like the entire year leading up to that. And so it was like the first time I felt joy after a lot of depression in a really long time was reading this story and watching this story. So as soon as I finished the show, I was like, I need to read this. And I read it in like 2 days. I read it really fast. Which obviously, you know, as a young adult, the writing's not hard to fly through, but also like I very rarely ever read books that fast. So let alone like did much of anything because of my mental health that year. So the fact that I suddenly read a book that fast and was engrossed by a show was like huge and monumental for me. So I think in a biased way, emotionally, this story just meant a lot for me in the time that it showed up in my life more than anything. The story is about these kids going to a summer camp, and Alaska, she is this mystery girl who a few of the guys are infatuated by, including our protagonist. And she's been through some intense pain that she's not the best at communicating at. And I'm sure if I watch it returned to the story now, I would find there's a lot more frustration in the character's immaturity. But I think as teenagers, these characters were embodied fantastically. Is that even a word? They're so realistic as teenagers though, and it was so lovely to see her love of literature, of course, because I love literature. But also just so much to do with the intensity of emotion and mental health in your teenagehood, and I think it encapsulated that really well. It has a lot to do with coming of age, which I'm a sucker for coming of age stories, and friendship and found family and figuring out your beliefs and all of these things that really marked my time in school and college, and navigating, griefs that come your way for maybe the first time, different kinds of grief. So, yeah, there's a lot of emotional novelty with darkness that you walk through with these characters. And I think that's just so important for young adults to be wading in, because it happens to all of us. So I think the way John Green handled all of the delicacy in the story was done really well. And I just thought it was very emotionally powerful. And there was hope woven in throughout all of the hardship that goes on for these characters. And I just really appreciate that. Okay, there are 3 all-time favorite books on this list that are of average size. The first of which is by my favorite author, Marcus Zusak, and that is I Am the Messenger. This is about a young man named Ed Kennedy, who's a cab driver, and he gets stuck in a sticky situation immediately. Later on, though, it's a contemporary. It turns into this mystery of him finding a playing card with directions on it, and not knowing where it comes from or why. And then as he follows the card's instructions, he starts running into situations and people he never would have otherwise. And it really turns into this everyday hero story. Is really cool, and it's kind of nice to not know anything, because this was a very surprising and unexpected story for me. I haven't read much like this, and it's hard to really explain what it is. But it's also similar themes to Looking for Alaska, with coming to terms with a lot of darkness and hardship in the world, and navigating your place in it. But it also is just, I don't know, it has everything to do with the relationships you make in life of all kinds, and how we can just come alongside and encourage every single person that we ever come into contact with, and how people make life extraordinary no matter who they are. And this is one I really do want to reread, and might reread this year. It captures something about humanity I can't quite explain. There's a bunch of fur flying around. And I feel like he captured something about humanity in this book that I've never seen anyone do before, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's so worthwhile. So lovely. Sorry, I'm failing at character names this time around. Hope you'll forgive me. The next one is Lesser Known by Khaled Hosseini. Not The Kite Runner, but rather A Thousand Splendid Suns. I enjoyed this one more, though in some ways it was kind of darker. I feel like you could argue they're both they both are dark, for sure. They're dark in different ways. And so for me, based on my life experiences, this one was more dark, because it also felt like it had more extended periods of darkness within it. This story is really an homage to the women of Afghanistan and their character, and it was very emotive, how they've had to culturally come through so much to fight for their own dignity. And in this story, it's less on a systemic scale, more on a personal scale. But it is emotional, because it's a personal story standing in for a much larger story. Even in the immense darkness, there's a lot of power of what's being shared, just in that it is being shared and it is being brought to light. Violence women have to go through can be so exacerbated by culture as well. And it really is a story that left me speechless in how brave it forwarded these women. It's a story I would genuinely want everyone to read at some point, even though I would also caveat it's really, really dark and you have to make sure you're in the headspace for something really, really dark. But it's the kind of darkness that needs to be expressed, where sometimes, you experience violence just because you're a woman. This story really just stares that dead in the face. Like, yeah, some people dehumanize you just because you're a woman. Out of that heavy note, we'll move into a very iconic series that has to be on this list, The Hunger Games. This is a stand-in for The Hunger Games. This one's actually not even in this page bracket, but it's a very beautiful book, right? This is Snow's prequel, as I'm sure most of you know. But The Hunger Games is like the book that has made me prepared for life in 2026. There are so many layers to The Hunger Games. I have a whole video on Sunrise on the Reaping if you'd like to listen. I was very impassioned about the implications of that story, about all of the violence we are constantly numbed to and continue to numb ourselves towards. And I think everyone needs to revisit The Hunger Games, preferably at least once a decade until your life's over. I think you just need to, because no matter what culture you're living in, no matter what social circles you're living in, this story is about all of us. And it's also about people that you could never possibly fully empathize with because they are so far removed from the type of pain that you go through. Yeah, rereading The Hunger Games really struck me that it is not just a denumbing to horrors in the world, but it's also a way that we empathize with people that we really struggle to empathize with. We learn how to empathize with the lower class, which most of us are privileged to not be a part of. We learn how to empathize with people who have PTSD, CPTSD, which most of us do not have to undergo. It's easy sometimes in a Christian context to leave all the heavy violence and injustice to the Old Testament, literally, to shove it into the past only. But that type of severe martyrdom violence is still alive today, and it may even be alive in places that not all of us believe it's alive in as well, and that's almost more sinister to me, honestly, than the places we know it's openly alive and everyone has accepted it's openly alive. Keep being sensitive to the pain of the world, because I know God is. Next, Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee. This is the author I was so impressed by. She's my age. She's in her late 20s. And she wrote a fantastic heist book, Portrait of a Thief. I immediately followed her. I don't think she has yet published anything else, but I was so inspired by the cast of characters she created, by the relationships she drew out, and by the cultural commentary she made on art and stealing art and reclaiming a culture's art for itself after it has been unrightfully stolen. There was a lot here to think about, similar to my joy of meditating on translation. This is meditating on art and giving credit where credit is due. And she did a fantastic job. She started a conversation culturally. She had a well-paced heist plot that was really gripping and fun and exciting. relational dynamics that were very heartwarming, and everything in between. I thought it was a really well-balanced story, maybe the most underrated on this list, and I think more people need to keep an eye out for Grace D. Lee because she's got it going on. Okay, another classic dystopia, The Maze Runner. The entire series. I loved the entire series. I really loved the first book, though. This is about Thomas and this group of almost Lord of the Flies-esque guys that he randomly appears and wakes up being sent into this world where they're in the middle of a maze that they can't get out of. And it's the series continues on. There's 3 books, and then there's a couple prequels similar to what The Hunger Games is now doing. But I really liked how it combined sci-fi, it combined action and adventure. So fun. I feel like I don't read enough stories where it really feels like the amount of action and gripping adventure that I see in movies, and so I really liked the way that he incorporated that. Not just like violence, like that we see in the Hunger Games, but it's almost like more of a video game where like a lot of what's happening is trying to figure out a puzzle, right? Which makes sense if the premise is a maze. It's literally a puzzle. But I really liked that it felt like a story and a puzzle as the reader at the same time. And it was just gripping, high stakes, as dystopia always has. But there's always like those type of like thriller horror reveals where you're slowly learning what type of world they're in and why, and it's devastating, but it's enamoring at the same time. The unraveling of the reality you think you know is unraveled so well, similar to the ways that we can rethink and unlearn things that we've taken as truth that maybe don't always turn out to be what's actually true. The way this series handles dystopia reminds me of the importance of media literacy. You're kind of discovering the concept of not everything you receive can necessarily be taken at face value or trusted. And in that way, it's kind of, I think what I like about dystopia in general is it's kind of learning what manipulation is and how to unlearn things from unreliable sources. So I'm very passionate about that because I've experienced manipulation firsthand in my life. And so I like considering how that type of sociology plays into large scale structures, societies. I think it's given me a very healthy level of skepticism for everything that I intake. Between my communication major and reading a lot of dystopian literature, I would say I have a healthy skepticism for most everything that I intake in the real world. Because stories are never just stories, they also apply to the world. My final all-time favorite that I wanted to add to this list is another very popular rom-com series, and that is To All the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han. This is my preferred Jenny Han series, mostly because some of these characters are actually mature. And I would say The Summer I Turned Pretty, they are not mature at all. All of these books are super cute because they have like extra content at the end. In this book, you have Laura Jean's Christmas cookie recipes. I believe it's the second book. It has some playlists that they listened to at the nursing home, and then there might be some more recipes at the end of the third book. But these are so cozy, and what I really love about the books, even more than the movies, even though I still enjoy the movies, are the books are even more family centric, and it's equal parts romantic focus in the storyline and familial focus. So basically, the premise, if you don't know already, this high schooler, Laura growing up, wrote letters to all of her crushes she ever had. And one day, her younger sister, out of some sort of sibling angst with something that happened, decided she was going to get back at her sister by mailing out these letters to all of her current and previous crushes. And this is the fallout. This is where we go from there. I really love how the sister dynamics grow over the series, how Laura Jean matures over the series and shows up for her family. And there's bits of nostalgia in here for a lot of things that you did as a teenager. There's some rom-com tropes, but it's overall very wholesome as well, which is what I prefer in romance, and more just focused on finding yourself and advocating for yourself and just learning how to grow in all kinds of relationships, from family to friends to romance. So I think she does a really good job, and I think The Summer I Turned Pretty walked so To All the Boys Could Run, and they were all fantastic. I would say the second book was actually my least favorite, but I really enjoyed how the series ended with the third book. And then the final book that I also own that I wanted to share is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was the other book about fame that I really, really enjoyed. My friend purchased this for me, which I'm very grateful for. This is about Evelyn Hugo, who was a Hollywood icon in this fantasy world. The main character is a magazine reporter, Monique, and Monique is trying to get content and ends up getting to meet with Evelyn to tell her life story as a huge feature piece in the magazine. And so it rotates between the present day, where Monique and Evelyn are bonding, and the past, where Evelyn's whole life story that she's sharing is being played out. It has a lot to do about women in Hollywood and how women, especially in the early 20th century, had to really overcome a lot of obstacles in Hollywood to be seen as worthy and valued and, treated like any and every human deserves to be treated. But I really appreciated how it walked through a lot of sexism that women had to go through in the industry, in the entertainment industry as a whole, but especially in her case, acting. I really liked all of that commentary. I was very pleased with that sociology commentary. Can you tell I love sociology? And there was also some twists and turns I wasn't expecting in the I guess both storylines actually, the present day and the past storyline. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect, but I think thematically this delivered what I wanted in terms of fame and art and everything. And yeah, I feel like a lot of these books had really like wholesome vibes and takeaways in the end. So they were all enjoyable for that. So those are all my books. I was clearly not feeling it when I started, but I'm very grateful that I did this. It makes me feel more like myself again. Remembering all of these stories, it's nice to remember seasons of my life when I had a lot more energy compared to currently. So thank you for doing this with me. It did lift my spirits, and I might not be able to do a lot, but I can do a little, and I did a little today. Thank you for being here with me. It is golden hour now, so praise Jesus. I love gold. I love yellow. I hope you guys are being gentle with yourselves. I know that I can continue to do so, but thank you for letting me be however I needed to be. I'm very grateful that I didn't feel like I had to perform at the beginning, but by the end I genuinely was feeling more energy and was able to exude that as well. So thank you for coming along with me, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye, friends.